welcome to the first somewhat experimental recording of a podcast by Asia-Pacific Defence Reporter editor Kym Bergmann. This is going to be a crawl, walk, run exercise, depending on what the listener reaction is to what we're trying to do. For the moment, I'm just going to stick with a weekly or fortnightly summary of what I think have been the most important defence issues, starting in Australia, but then we'll have a look at what's happening in the region, and if there's time and sufficient stuff has been happening, we might go a bit broader than that. Eventually, if this develops, I'd like to get it to the point where we can also include interviews. People should feel free to contact me via email if there are any particular topics that they'd like explored, or if they've got any feedback, either good or bad. We don't mind. Okay, just to do a few of the big obvious ones. JP9102, sovereign satellite capability. There was a somewhat surprising decision on Monday to go to an immediate winner in the form of Lockheed Martin. This was different from the process that the department first outlined, I think I would say 3 or 4 years ago, and so has come as and that process involved a shortlisting decision involving 2 companies who would then be doing further risk reduction studies for the next 18 months or 2 years or something like that. So these sorts of decisions, they have good and bad aspects. I mean, the winner, Lockheed Martin, congratulations to them. They were always in a very strong position. They were going to be difficult to beat. But there were several other competitors that had also put in very strong bids. Of those, my own pick were the ones from Airbus. That was pretty much from the British part of the company, with based on a Skynet 6A satellite, and Boeing, who of course are very well known in the domain, and they were offering a variant of their 702 series of satellites that have been in widespread use for both military and commercial use. Neither of them made it. We don't know why. I would imagine that both companies are going to look for some sort of debrief from the Department of Defence. Whether or not that is agreed to, we don't know. Other bidders were Northrop Grumman. Again, I'm sure a technically strong bid, but they seem to come to the exercise a little bit late in the piece. And then there was Optus, and the Optus bid is the one that we know the least about. They didn't have a particularly outgoing strategy when it came to communicating with journalists. So the only things that I can speculate on there is that I believe that they were planning to have their satellites built in Japan and also launched from Japan by a Japanese launch agency, which might have just been a little bit too far out of the mainstream for our fairly risk-averse Department of Defence to be comfortable with. That's pure speculation. I really don't know. The benefit is that Lockheed Martin can really get a move on and stick with the schedule, or even possibly slightly accelerate it, which in this day and age is no bad thing. Commiserations to the losers. It's always a very unpleasant situation to be in, as I can speak from fairly distant personal experience. We'll keep an eye on how things unfold on that one. Then also there was the ditching of an MRH Taipan helicopter in Jervis Bay while on a Special Forces training mission, it would seem. There was no serious injuries to the 10 people on board, thank goodness for that. One person hit their head, and the other swallowed a mouthful of seawater, as I understand it, and that was about as serious as it got. This is mainly because the MRH has flotation devices, and so when the pilot had to ditch it, presumably because of engine failure, at least everyone was able to get out. The helicopter itself remained floating on the surface and was towed back to the beach, and has been cleaned up, and I believe it's now actually flying again. Now, The issue here, and this has been a constant theme of mine for several years, as regular viewers would know, replacing the MRH with the Black Hawks, I'm yet to be convinced that that's a sensible use of taxpayers' money. In a future episode, I'll go into a whole lot of the maintenance issues in much greater detail. But for the moment, I'll just focus on this accident and to point out that Black Hawk helicopters simply do not have flotation devices. And if it had been a Black Hawk helicopter that had ditched in Jervis Bay, the outcome would have been different. At the very least, the helicopter would have sunk and would now be sitting on the floor of Jervis Bay under how many metres of water, I don't know. Hopefully everyone would have got out of it in time. But without flotation devices, it's a much riskier exercise to ditch, something that no one ever wants to do, obviously, than on an MRH. Now, look, again, since this is an introductory podcast, there's no point me going on endlessly about things that aren't going to be of interest, but I'll just conclude by mentioning we've found out, again through some good reporting by my colleague Andrew Green from the ABC, that the Navy is buying a second ex-offshore support vessel to use in service here for undersea experimentation or something along those lines. This one follows hard on the heels of a similar purchase about 18 months ago of another ship which was or has been renamed Reliant. I think the new one is going to be renamed Defiant. Now, the problem with these, or the issue with these, is why is it done in secrecy? Why can't we all, particularly the Australian shipbuilding sector, be told in advance why these things are happening and the reasons why, and what is the benefit of buying a second-hand ship that typically these things are like work to death in the offshore oil and gas industry, and so they are tired and getting towards the end of their lives, and it would be nice to have some sort of explanation as to why another $100 million or whatever it is being spent on this, rather than looking at a new build in Australia. Now, when you're looking at a basic commercial standard platform, $100 million actually buys you, a couple of 1,000 tons of ship. So anyway, let's hope that one of these days Defence is able to put a bit more information into the public domain, because at the moment we're just all left scratching our heads wondering what's going on. Now, I've not had the opportunity to go into or break down the funding costs of Defiant, but I did crunch the numbers with Reliant, and just on my back of a beer coaster calculation, that one looked like Australia had paid $20 or $30 million more than the market price for the thing. I put questions to the Department of Defence, but again, typically they didn't answer. That's going to be another recurrent theme of these podcasts for the enlightenment of listeners. I'll try and give you some understanding of just how difficult it is in Australia to get information that rightly should be in the public domain. I'll conclude by saying that all of us who work in this space understand that some things, for reasons of national security, do need to be protected. No argument about that. The only other argument for keeping something hidden is commercial in confidence stuff. But both of those categories, in my opinion, are just massively overused, absolutely massively overused. If you really look at stuff that the Australian Department of Defence wants to conceal, a lot of it is already available publicly through sources in the United States. The Pentagon has a very open approach to contracting. So that's I would say it's more than an annoyance. It's something that really should be concerning everyone in industry and everyone in the general public. And just so that people don't think I'm picking just on the department takes their cues from the government of the day and in particular the minister of the day. I thought that Australia, we had reached a low point from a releasability of information perspective when Peter Dutton was the Defence Minister, because he actually imposed an unprecedented ban on any interviews being given by ADF personnel or departmental figures, and he also imposed just the most ludicrous regime of restricting answers to questions, no matter how legitimate, to like one sentence per question. And you think, this is meant to be in Australia. We're living in an open society. People, taxpayers, are entitled to know what's happening to their money. And with the change of government, all of us in the media were expecting that the climate would change and that we would see a return to what had been a previous normal, where you could lodge requests for information, it would be provided to you in a timely manner, as I say, with those two exceptions of national security or commercial in confidence, and that we would be able to organise interviews with people. But unfortunately, I have to record that there has been almost no change whatsoever. So that's a big disappointment. Anyway, this is the end of this first experimental broadcast, so I hope it has some content of interest. Let's take it from there and see how we go. Bye.